Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Sunday Sound Design, the show where we become better sound designers by deconstructing some of our favorite patches and presets and re-engineering them in Ableton Live. My name is Will Doggett. If this is your first time joining me, this show is all about just hanging out, right? We release it every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Central. Grab a cup of coffee, plug in your MIDI controller, and just kind of come along for the ride as we deconstruct patches and presets and figure out what we like about them and how they were made. Now for today, we're going to be using a preset called Spooky. This is from the Ambient Pads Patch Collection for Ableton Live 11 Suite. I've included the link if you're interested in purchasing this, the link in the description of this video. It's a patch collection I created. Again, as I mentioned last episode, I promise not every single episode will be something I created. I think I've got one or two more that I want to break down, and then we'll get into some presets in Ableton Live's core sound library that I really like. But today, this is the patch we're working with, Spooky. It's again an ambient pad collection. Let's try this out, see what it sounds like, and then we'll break it down from scratch. Here we go. Okay, so this patch is what I would probably say is a pretty straightforward pad patch. Now, one of the reasons I picked this is I like the kind of airiness that it has to it, the breathiness that it has. Like, I don't know if you can hear that or tell that. I forgot in last week's episode to mention this early on, but if you wear headphones, I think this will be a way better experience for you. But it has kind of a certain breathiness or airiness to it that I really like. And even when I take the filter and the frequency and bring that down, so let's filter out some of the high end there just a little more. Again, there's still that kind of airiness to it, that breath about it. So let's deconstruct this patch and then we'll recreate it. And as we always do on every episode of Sunday Sound Design, if you want to download this patch and preset for free, then check the link in the description of this video. And you can download, once I get to the end, whatever preset and patch I come up with at the end, you can download for free and start using. This does require Ableton Live 11 Suite in order to make this happen. But you're going to have tons of fun working with it. So let's dive in. First thing I'm going to do, as we always do, let's open up this instrument rack. Let's take a look at the sounds used to create this patch. So a couple things I want to point out. One, we've got our default kind of go-to. Again, as I mentioned, I'm a man of a few tricks and man of few talents. So I tend to reuse a few things. And part of this consistency so that when you buy, I'm trying to defend myself here, but part of it is consistency so that when you buy a preset patch from me, everything seems to fit in the same collection, the same family. But we've got this verb rack that we're used to using. We'll break that down and walk through that. We've got something new though, phaser, which we haven't used on any patch or preset yet. And it's not an effect I often use, but we'll talk about, we'll listen to the sound and maybe understand why I chose that. And then this is using Wavetable. So I believe last week our patch used Wavetable as well too, which is one of my favorite instruments in Ableton Live. Operator is my number one. Wavetable is probably my second favorite. So let's break this down. So first thing I'm going to do to save us time is I'm going to move our Wavetable instrument over. Let's just hear the default state of this. And I'm actually, let's hear it as it is, and then we'll break it down. Okay, so I really like that. Sometimes I start with a patch that's maybe a little brighter, and I guess I should mention frequency is pretty low on that. So let's open that up for a second. Wow, that is very loud. Okay, so let's pull the volume down on that. By the time you hear this, I'll have brought that volume down so that it doesn't kill your ears much like it did mine. But once I open the filter on that, that is a very bright patch. So here's what it sounds like. Okay. It's a great sounding patch. Like we talked about last week, sometimes it's relative. Things sound good, sometimes things don't. Even with no verb, even with no effects, that's just like a really fun. And I always think of patches and presets as, do they inspire me? Do they make me want to keep playing? I'm not a keys player, as you can tell. But if it makes me want to sit behind the keyboard and keep playing and play a particular thing, like I'm all down for that. Like, I mean, that in and of itself is really fun. Okay. Let me not be distracted for much longer. I'll pull our volume back up here and let's break down what's happening here. So first thing I noticed is, again, polyphony. We went from mono. Let's still turn that down substantially more. There we go. Okay. So we went from taking it from just default of mono to poly. We're 8 voices. Again, as I mentioned last week, just be aware that once you get to 9 voices, it's going to restart. So maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. The other thing is Unison. And I love the Unison stuff, particularly classic. There's a Shimmer one that's really good, but classic on Wavetable is one of my favorites. So let's listen to it with it and then without it. So here's with. Okay, so there's Unison with classic. Now let's turn that to none. And we're still going to back this down a little bit. Okay, now let's listen to it off. I mean, that makes a world of difference just in that. And that Unison of kind of separating and trying to make it wider and bigger sounding. This is not, it's not bad, but it's not inspiring. But suddenly when I go from that to this, right, minus my bad playing, is just super fun, right? So just that little addition of Unison. It's on classic, 3 voices, 24%. So it's not up super high. That's one thing with Unison that I've particularly found that can kind of take something from being like super synthy to making it work. When the amount's super high, let's go super high with this. Now there's a place for that. Not most of the music that I play and enjoy, but there's a place for it. But I do feel like your patch, it will be and will sound better and definitely be way more interesting the higher you can go with that number. So like get the amount of Unison as high as you could possibly go before it sounds weird, right? So that's still a little too loud for me for the kind of vibe I'm going for. So let's back it down. Yeah, I mean, that's super great. Super, super great. So then next, let's go to the oscillators that we're using here. So we've got 2 oscillators. Let's listen to the first one. Again, I'm a man of few skills and few talents. So you could see right here, Vintage. We talked about this last time. Vintage is like my favorite collection of sounds and wavetables in Wavetable. And we're using System 8 I guess combo or combinator. I don't know what that would be. 49% is kind of where we are. No effects here, but we are doing a couple things with the other oscillator in particular that I do want to point out and mention in a second. But let's turn that other oscillator back on. Let's hear it with it on. Okay, turn oscillator 2 off and let's listen just to the first one. Okay, again, if you're not wearing headphones, this would be a good time to pop on headphones because I'm about to talk about something that you really have to have headphones on in order to understand and appreciate. So what you'll notice here, and I mentioned this last week, that I didn't do this on last week's patch, but I did do this on this week's patch. So a lot of times, if I use both of the oscillators, let's actually hear oscillator 2, then I'll show you what I did. So let's turn that on. Let's turn 1 off. Okay. So what I did here, first on oscillator 1, I panned it 50 to the left, right? So it's more to the left. Oscillator 2 is actually centered. I think that's supposed to be to the right. So we'll go ahead and put that to the right. That was a mistake, so I'll fix that. But the other thing I did here, and you could see oscillator 2, of course, from Vintage. Again, I'm a man of a few talents. Vintage and the Bird's dual saw. That's one of my favorite sounds in Wavetable, and we're at about 75% is where we are here. The other thing I did though with this that makes this super interesting to me, and you have to be careful if you do too much of this, particularly too much of this with Unison or with modulation effects, it just starts to turn into mush. So be careful. But I did detune this oscillator 3 cent. So let's take the detune off. Now we have this. It's not bad. Right, it's not awful, but to me it feels maybe slightly out of phase, or it just doesn't feel wide like it did before. So watch what happens though. Let's I think I detuned it 3 cent. So now let's add that back in. Okay, it's subtle. Let's go even further. I mean, honestly, even if you go super far, and maybe because it's panned so far to the right, even if I go super far, like it doesn't feel too out of place for me, right? And maybe that's because the Unison is there kind of covering some of that up. But I tend to like that as a way to thicken it up and to kind of separate those sounds where they don't all feel just like smushed in the center there. So that's kind of our the main thing that's happening there. We do have sub on, but it's turned all the way down, and that's just for the low end. So I do have octave set to 0, which is what I typically do. So with sub off like it is, here's our, let's just play a low end. Okay, but let's turn that up now. Go to about 0 and listen to it now. So that's definitely a nice thing if you want something to fill in the low end. If you're a good enough keys player, we can actually take advantage of that. So something, let's say like this maybe. I find it humorous. I said, if you're good enough keys player to do this, and then I played the worst thing ever. But you can hear the difference again. Let's take that out. Right, and basically what that's doing is that's adding just a sine wave at the same octave, but just blending that in. So that's super helpful if you know how to use it. Now, again, man of few talents. So as you expected, I turned the filter on. We went to the Oscar filter, which is my favorite preset, just a hint of filter drive. And then we can use this particularly. This is where we start to get into like making this feel and sound like a pad. So we go from this to that, which is like, right? Even that without a reverb is like pretty stinking good. Like I'm pretty happy with that. Let's take a look. I don't think I did anything crazy here. I guess the release is pretty long, so that's part of why it feels like a pad. The attack, I have added a little bit of time there. So this is what I believe our default attack looks like in Wavetable. Okay, now if we get that back to where we were. And that really is the trick, to take almost any sound and make it feel like a pad. Increase your attack so it kind of swells in. Don't go too far. Like for instance, if I go too far with this, let's go like 1 second. Which honestly, I mean, that's got a cool vibe to it. Like that's a sound that you could use. But we don't want to go too far. So I'm going to go back to where we were, about 29 milliseconds, and then release. I can increase that. So it basically feels like a pad. So it kind of swells in and then it stays there. So I could take my hands off the keys. You can use obviously a sustain pedal to sustain it, but the release is once I let go and re-trigger another sound, how long does it take for that initial sound to like release, to return back to its initial kind of point? And I always increase mine a little bit when I'm doing pad stuff. If you're using reverb as well too, don't go too far on it. Again, we want to avoid mush. Now, if we look at MIDI stuff here, it looks like pitch bend is affecting it. Mod is affecting oscillator 1 position, which I'm not doing anything with right now. Nothing on the matrix. So that's pretty it. So I'm kind of a boring sound designer guy here, but Wavetable is just great as like a sound generation thing. You don't have to go in and do crazy, dubsteppy type things that are really complex and using a lot of the matrix mixer to do crazy things. Just pull up a great sound and have fun with it, right? Like you could just pull up a great sound that you enjoy, that inspires you, and Wavetable is a great source for those ideas. So now there's our Wavetable. I'm super happy with that. Let's go back and let's see the other effects. Oh yeah, that's right. This has phaser. So let's just copy this phaser and let's figure out what the heck we're using the phaser for. So let's disable this first. Let's open our filter a little bit. We won't go all the way, but just a little bit more. Now let's add our phaser in. Ooh, interesting. Okay, so we basically almost lose the left side there, which is very interesting. Okay. You can see like the different kind of vibes you can do with the poles here. Okay, and then we've got just kind of where our frequency and feedback is placed. That's where we are, but we could go here. It just happened to be kind of placed there, but you can see by moving the phaser, and this, again, I'll mention this without reverb, maybe sounds a little odd, a little out of place, but as we start to throw the reverb on here, that's going to add some really cool motion. In particular, if we map, and I may, every preset so far I've just mapped to match what we did before. I may tweak a little bit on this one because I kind of want to map that frequency and feedback and have that as something that I can use expressively, because you can hear, and again, once we add reverb in, that's going to be super cool, but the differences we get in that is pretty wild, right? And so I'm basically, as I'm moving this, I'm adjusting both the frequency and feedback. So I like that. I'm a fan of that for sure. Now I'm not using the LFO to modulate anything. That's turned off. So it's just kind of a boring, plain default phaser preset, but experiment with that and try that. The wet's all the way at 100%. But we'll try that out. So now we're just going to recreate our reverb from scratch. We do this almost every week, again, partially because I'm just boring and make the same sounds, but reverb is a great effect on pads. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do what the same tricks I always do, increase our quality to high. I'm going to bring my spin. Actually, I'll turn my spin off because I've got phaser for that. Chorus, I'm going to leave on this time. We'll increase our decay time. We'll map that in a moment, and then we'll take our dry wet all the way up. So now let's turn off reverb. Let's listen to it. Now let's bring our reverb on. Again, I mean, that's not a bad sound in and of itself. We're going to make a couple tweaks here, but let's get back over here and let's open up our filter. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and map this. I'm going to map this to this knob on my MIDI controller here. And I'm just going to kind of play this live and show you just even adding that reverb on and moving and adjusting our filter. That's such a great trick to like make any sound, any patch sound like an awesome pad. Okay. So let's fiddle with this. So I'm going to bring my filter all the way down here. Right, we can add some dynamics, obviously, by using that filter, opening the filter, lowering the filter. Right, so a lot of really, really cool possibilities with that. But let's add the kind of extra special sauce that I think makes a difference with reverb stuff. So with that reverb loaded on, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to group it. You know the routine if you've watched Sunday Sound Design before. I'm going to group it. I'm going to go to our chain and I'm going to add just a dry chain here. I'm going to go ahead, drop the dB of both of these down 4. And then we'll call this one verb. And essentially what we're doing is we're adding back the dry signal into this and using parallel processing as opposed to serial processing, which is kind of everything stacking together, and as opposed to adding an effect so that we lose the initial kind of sound of the source. We want to add the source back into it. So here's what we've got. We've got a reverb and we've got our dry signals. Let's go back to just verb. Let's open our filter for this. Now let's add our dry signal back in. You hear how it starts to really kind of cut through, makes a big difference there. So now let's play with this for a little bit. Dry signal in. Okay. Now, so I'm happy with that. Now the final piece that I want to add into this, which again, This is what we do almost every week, is take our hybrid reverb and we're going to use this for Shimmer. So we're going to dive in here. There's so much that the hybrid reverb should do. We should do a walkthrough with just that, but I'm just going to use the algorithm. So I'm going to select that so that I get rid of the convolution stuff. The algorithm I'm going to use here is Shimmer. We are going to keep the pitch octave there, maybe increase our decay slightly. And we're going to set our dry wet all the way to 100%. And then now with that, throwing in our reverb in our rack, we have this. I really like the low end on this patch. There's some fun stuff there. Okay, now that we've got all of our effects loaded in, let's start to put it together. Let's rack it up in an instrument rack. And this is what really makes it all playable in the end. So we're going to take our wavetable here. We're going to hold shift, and then we're going to select our audio effect rack here and do Command G, which is going to group them. And then we're going to go ahead and rename this. And this is Spooky Recreation. Okay. We've got our wavetable in. Let's go ahead and map our volume. We're going to click right here and right click to map to macro 8, because that's where our volume typically is. This is obviously super important so that we can adjust our volume and not blow our eardrums out like we did early in the episode. And then we have filter frequency, filter drive. So these are easy. I mentioned this last week kind of casually, but what I'm doing here is one of my favorite reasons why I love Ableton Live. Watch how easy it is to map this. Right click, macro 1. Oh, and it says it's already mapped. Yeah, that's fine. We'll replace that mapping. We'll right click. Let's map to macro 2. Right click, macro 2. And I have control over those, and then I can go and map to here using my MIDI controller, which is super, super great. That error message you saw at the beginning is because I mapped my filter to that knob and it's telling me, hey, you already mapped this. We're going to remap. That's fine. Like Live makes it easy to make sure I don't mess anything up. Okay, next thing we want to do, I think, is sub. Yeah, just to match what we've done. And this is super helpful because I think this sound really benefits from that additional sub there. Unison. I'm going to change it because I'm in charge here. I'm actually going to map our frequency, okay, to macro 4 and our feedback to macro 4. And then we're going to call this, let's call this motion. All right. Which is basically the frequency and feedback of phaser. So as I move this, you can see how that moves around, which is pretty nice. Now we could go in to our mapping browser here, and this is pretty fun. So let's go to phaser, frequency, and feedback. You could adjust these to where they are inverted. Like maybe this is, okay, let's leave it like that and see what that does. So we're inverting our values. So as I turn up, we get the higher or lower frequency. Turn down, we get a higher frequency. You could do all sorts of really cool things. I'm going to go back to our defaults here. So I'm just clicking on it and hitting delete to go back to our defaults. But the mappings browser is super helpful when you're particularly mapping for live performance. Now, let's do our verb stuff. So we're going to go to this audio effect rack. We're going to map our verb volume, our verb decay. Just right click here. And then for Shimmer, we're going to map our dry wet there. Okay. Now we're going to right click here. We're going to map this to 5, this to 6, and then we'll go rename, and then this to 7. All right. We already mapped our volume, so that gets us there. So this will be verb. This will be verb decay. This will be shimmer, and then volume. Okay. So now I'm going to bring my shimmer down because that's just way too much the way it was. Bring our filter down a little. Bring our verb up. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm happy with all that. The verb feels super low to me. Let me look at this for just a second. Let me unmap and make sure I'm not doing something weird here. No, that looks right. Okay. Yeah, just for some reason it felt super low to me. Let me look at the settings to see if there's anything else. Actually, I think I'm going to bring spin on this because that feels like it's going to make it a little more interesting. Yeah, there we go. Add a little more life to it. And then again, we can go to motion now. You can hear how that's kind of changing and shaping it. We can bring our sub gain down, which is pretty fun. Maybe increase our filter drive a little, open our filter. That's a really dynamic, nice pad patch, which is actually, despite what the title says, actually is not very spooky. So I am super happy with that patch, starting from Wavetable, adding some phaser, adding some reverb, not a lot of effects there. Unison is making a big difference on that particular patch. And again, another example to me why I love doing sound design in Ableton Live. If you want to download this patch that we recreated, Spooky Recreation, for free, check out the link in the description of this video, or you can head to sundaysounddesign.com. Look for episode 3, because that's what this one is. That's what we're on now. And you can recreate this really expressive, very versatile pad patch that I think will work in a lot of different content for free. Now, as a reminder, it does require Live 11 Suite. If you don't have Suite, download the demo and try it out. Like I mentioned in the last week episode why I love Ableton Live as a platform for sound design. But download these patches and presets and try them in the demo of Suite, and it may be a reason for you to upgrade. You may go, man, this is enough for me to upgrade, because I love messing with these sounds. I love diving into Wavetable and Operator and all the very fun things that are associated with that. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one. As always, it airs at 10 a.m. Central next Sunday for our next episode of Sunday Sound Design. Hey, if you have ideas of patches, presets you want to try to recreate or dive deep into, let me know. Like I mentioned, I've got a couple other of sounds that I've created that I want to kind of break down, just because it's fun for me to remember what I created. But if you have ideas of things you want to break down, recreate in the show, let me know, and we'll do that, and we'll schedule it for a future episode. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week, 10 a.m. Central. Bye, everybody.